You're watching CNN. I'm Brooke Baldwin. An 8-year-old boy in Kentucky, may have been acting out at school, but the ACLU says what a school resource officer did in response to that was absolutely against the law. You know what he did? He put the child in handcuffs. And those handcuffs were not at the child's wrists, they were around his upper arms, and there is video.
You don't get to swing at me like that. Now, you can either behave the way you know you're supposed to, or you suffer the consequences. But it's your decision to behave this way. Sit back down.
That little boy was restrained just like that for 15 minutes, according to the ACLU, which is suing that school resource officer Kevin Sumner and his boss, the Kenton County Sheriff. This all happened actually in the fall of last year. It happened to this boy and twice to a 9-year-old girl. Both children have ADHD. The Covington Public Schools said today in a statement that the school resource officers are, quote, not called upon by school district staff to punish or discipline a student who engages in a school-related offense. So with that, let me go to Lisa Thurau, Executive Director of Strategies for Youth, a nonprofit organization that trains patrol and school resource officers. So Lisa, wonderful to have you on. Wanted to have your voice. So, you know, the first question is, we just heard from the school, if it is forbidden for these school resource officers to discipline these students, can you just explain to me what situations would arise in which these officers would be called in to help with a child?
Well, thank you for inviting me on. And I think you've hit the key question here. It's not clear to me why any child needs to be handcuffed, certainly for the kind of behavior we heard this young man had exhibited prior to the use of restraints. But I think the greater question that your question provokes is, where's the oversight? If the Kentucky School Department of Education, State Department of Education says don't use restraints, don't be using punishment through restraints or arrest, why are the sheriff's deputies using it? And we know from other school departments which do use SROs that there's training and information that we can give SROs so that they don't use unnecessary, unreasonable, and excessive use of force, especially for children with special needs who need special treatment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, I think anyone I've talked to today, especially, you know, the moms in my life, all are horrified when they see this video. And so I think there's the reaction piece of it, but then there's also the piece, you know, in which, listen, there are kids who need more than just a timeout. And so I guess the question then would be, how should those kids be handled?
Well, we have to go back to the root question here. Are police the right ones to handle children in those circumstances?
Right.
When you have certified special education teachers who are in schools for that exact purpose. When a school system cedes its control to law enforcement, and law enforcement is not recruited for its capacity to deal with youth, it's not trained for its capacity and to be sure it knows how to deal with children of all stripes, then you're going to have this kind of outcome, because law enforcement is trained only on how to deal with adults, and it's going to use the treatment it used for adults on children. And this is not developmentally appropriate or competent, but in a state like Kentucky, not a single hour in the Kentucky Academy is allocated to training officers how to deal with children or youth, and certainly not how to train them to deal with children in the public schools. So we should anticipate that this kind of collision of points of view is going to happen in states where there's no eligibility requirement that would ensure that officers know how to deal with young people. They're not trained. And then there's no oversight about their use of force or restraints.
Which I think you've hit on the key issue of training and lack of training. But I'm also left wondering, final question to you, you know, you think back to when you were 8, you remember, this is the kind of thing you would remember as an 8-year-old, having handcuffs slapped on your arm for misbehaving. And I'm wondering just how this child should be, I don't know, handled. I mean, let's talk about the just psychological ramifications of that.
Well, we know that this kind of conduct traumatizes the child, weakens their connection to school, and we know equally well that there are other approaches to be used. The question here is, why didn't the Covington Public School District and the Covington Sheriff's Department ensure that age-appropriate best practices were used with this child when all the evidence is out there that there are effective alternatives for that age group. If we want the child to drop out of school, if we want to punish and push out instead of correct and keep these children, we're going to have to change our practices. And Kentucky, I think, at the state level, needs to look at that.
Lisa Thurau, Executive Director of Strategies for You, thank you so much.
Thanks for having us on.
You got it. Coming up is